Now, before I go any further in this, I want to say this. Like anyone who's being honest with themselves, I know that I have made mistakes. I am sorry for harm I have caused. I have listened and I have learned a lot, and I am grateful for the many conversations that we've had together. It is a great honor to be able to partner with Indian country, and that's what I've tried to do as a senator, and that's what I promise I will do as President of the United States of America.
That was Elizabeth Warren attempting to seize control of and end the controversy over a narrative that has dogged her campaign, deservedly or otherwise. She started her remarks at an Iowa forum on Native American issues today with an apology. You might remember her past claims of Native American ancestry have been the subject of much ridicule, particularly from Donald Trump, who still refers to the Massachusetts senator as Pocahontas. And last week, even Trump was questioning if he went there too soon.
Too early. It's like Elizabeth Warren. I did the Pocahontas thing. I hit her really hard, and it looked like she was down and out, but that was too long ago. I should have waited, but don't worry. We will revive it. It can be revived. It can be right? It will be revived, and it can be revived very easily and very quickly.
So Jake and the table are back. Karine, just starting with you here, picking up. Let's start with Warren herself and what she decided to do today. We all remember back in the October of the midterm election season back in 2018, she tried this gambit where she did this DNA test, which did not go well. She was widely criticized by other Democrats as being a distraction in the middle of the midterms, by the whole methodology of it. It seemed like a stunt. She got hammered by friendly fire. A lot of Democrats very unhappy. Yeah. And then she kind of let it sit for a while, and now she's come back with this very declarative kind of statement today, doing something that someone like Donald Trump never does, something that Joe Biden almost never does, wanted to apologize in a full-throated, straightforward way. Do you think this works for her? Is it over now?
Look, I think, and I was thinking the same way, good to see someone in leadership actually apologize, which is really wonderful to hear, and kudos for her. Look, she had a misstep, right? And that's a kind way of saying it. It was a mistake. And it seems to me, by looking at her plan that she released, by just listening to the indigenous people, she really took an introspective look and figured out, okay, this is what I did wrong. And I think she's trying to move forward in the right way this time around. And I think it will be beneficial. I think it will help her. The other thing, too, I want to say about her is she's probably one of the only political figures out there that's been battle tested and won the test thus far by Donald Trump. I mean, Pocahontas is a racial slur that Donald Trump, as we know, used over and over and over again. And look at her now. She's rising in the polls because of her plans, because she's running an incredibly smart campaign. And so that is something that she has that nobody else has, is that she's so far has survived one of the awful nicknames by Donald Trump.
And to piggyback on that, that's caught the White House's attention. Trump's bluster aside at that rally, the president and people around him have been impressed. She is the first Democrat who really took a punch this campaign, got knocked down, but got back up and kept going. The fact that you can already have sort of a comeback story, that's often really important during these campaigns. And they recognize that this is someone who perhaps they believe now is more formidable than they first thought. They're seeing her poll numbers. They know the organization's pretty good. You know, there's certainly still plenty of them who are preparing for Biden as their eventual nominee. But they're now much more willing to consider the possibility that the general election may be against Elizabeth Warren.
You could see it in the president's remarks, because there was almost a sort of begrudging respect there for that. Because he said, and he was like, well, we'll have to go back at it again, I guess, and try this. It's not over. He made very clear that he's not finished with this line of attack, but also that he did it and it didn't work.
He'll need others.
I want to ask. I'm going to come back to Trump in a second and ask where he goes from here on this. But I first want to just stick with Warren for one more second with Jake, and ask you, Jake. New York Times points out that in addition to this apology, she also has a plan, which of course is Elizabeth Warren's trademark. She got a plan for that. And in this case, we have a quote here from the Times which talks about on Friday, Ms. Warren rolled out a set of proposals intended to help Native Americans, covering topics like tribal sovereignty and missing indigenous women. She also released a wide-ranging legislative proposal covering areas like criminal justice, health care, and education. So, I want to just think about the Democratic race here. There's no doubt that Elizabeth Warren is on the rise. There's no doubt that the story in some ways of the first 8 months of this race, she has been the one candidate who has had consistent upward trajectory pretty much since the race started. You've seen Bernie Sanders on the downslide or throughout, Joe Biden kind of teetering, losing a little bit of support. But really, Warren has been the story of a candidate with focus, energy, strength, good campaign organizations in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. Is this combination, the 1-2 punch of a declarative apology at this point and her kind of trademark policy proposals on it, is this the thing that allows her to put this question behind her? And I ask one, this is a long question, but I ask one last thing about it, which is this controversy is never really about Native American ancestry. This controversy has been about Elizabeth Warren's authenticity. Yep. Was she lying about this thing in order to get advantages that were meant to be given to people who are of color, people who are non-white, people who are minority? Has she moved past all of that? Again, Donald Trump aside, in the Democratic race, or is this something that could still nag at her as she gets further and further elevation?
She might have moved past it in the primary, but if there was a controversy more tailor-made for Donald Trump, I don't know what it would be. I mean, this gets to the heart of everything Donald Trump has said about politicians and about Washington, that they're phonies, that they lie to get advantages, and they game a system that has turned against the everyman and is being manipulated by dishonest people. And that's what the president is, presumably, that's what he said already, and that's what he's going to continue to say about Elizabeth Warren. And I think in a general election, to be honest with you, and this could be just me being naive or perhaps a bit jaded, I think in a general election, people gloss over some of these policy proposals. I know I'm going to get hit for saying that, but they do. And Donald Trump speaks in plain English and plain terms, and I think he has an advantage in that sense. I think in a general election, perhaps that's an advantage for Donald Trump, and combine that with this argument about authenticity with Elizabeth Warren, and I just don't know. I'm just laying out some of these dynamics here. And again, one other thing that people are not talking about, and no Democratic candidate has talked about, is how they're going to get these plans through. I mean, they're talking about very ambitious pieces of legislation that basically stand no chance in the reality that we live in Washington. So those two issues, I think, are worth keeping an eye on. So before I come back to Trump, I want to ask you one more question about Democrats here, right? So we know that to win the Democratic nomination, you have got to get a lot of non-white votes. You got to do well with African-American voters. You got to do well with Hispanic voters. And there are a much smaller number of Native American voters, but it's another constituency, part of the mosaic in the Democratic Party. One of the questions about Warren was, would this question I just raised with Jake, this authenticity question, would non-white voters, if this was a big issue, that she was claiming to have Native American ancestry, that she'd use that to get essentially affirmative action in her professional career, would that be a problem for her as she tried to make inroads with other non-white voters? And we know this is, other than Joe Biden right now, there's no one who has a big chunk of African-American vote, for instance. So I ask you, just kind of tease this apart here. In the Democratic lane, how is she handling this well, or does she still have a challenge here that could, again, dog her just to get the nomination before she has to go deal with Donald Trump?
So I think in the primary, I think Jake is absolutely right. There was the authenticity question. Absolutely. I think that if you are not authentic about who you are and what you present yourself to be, and people don't think that's real, then, you will have problems with that non-minority vote in particular. That minority vote is probably that you were talking about. But I actually think outside of the DNA test, outside of the heritage, Elizabeth Warren has been doing a really good job. She was one of the first and only, really, I could argue, of white candidates out there who was talking about her plans in putting a racial lens and putting that multicultural feel through all of her plans. And I think that mattered. People see that. People see that in the black community, and people really are connecting to that with her when they see her out there, when she's going everywhere. everywhere, even in red states. She's going to different communities, and she talks about her plan, and she's unapologetic about it. She's like, no, it's not just about one community, it's about all the communities. So I think she was already there before this. I think this will help her, having this comprehensive plan around the indigenous people and having this kind of event that she's having today.
Jake, I know you got to go, so I want to come back to you with one last question. And I don't know if I have time, I'm either going to hit Lemire on this too, because I do want to get back to Trump, right? So there's a Dave Weigel piece, which I think was interesting the other day. Dave Weigel on Pocahontas. He writes, after absorbing 3 years of insults from the president, most of them focused on her past claims of Native American ancestry, Warren has settled into a new position. She's not being asked about the insults because they're not making news. In the past month, the president has deployed the Pocahontas insult against Warren 3 times. In the past, that insult had media outlets scrambling for a response from Warren, but more recently, the insult simply hasn't made news. So, that's what Trump does these things for, right? I mean, there's a racial element to it for sure, but there's also he likes to just to throw out insults that will cause reporters to scramble and go and put the candidate that he's attacking in an uncomfortable position. Is there a chance that Trump looks at this, and although he said in that clip we played, we got to revive it, we can revive it, that he just looks at the kind of the way the coverage is working and says, this is just not working anymore for me, and has to move on to some other way of attacking Warren if he's going to try to get something going against her?
Yeah, I think he could pivot off this. And this actually gets to a point a Republican brought up to me the other day, which is actually doing too many rallies, saying too much actually works against the president's favor. And it just becomes kind of white noise in the background of a very loud and busy campaign. But listen, again, I really do think that the president's going to focus on this authenticity, that if she's presenting herself as you guys just said at the table, if she's presenting herself one way that is not reality, then what else is not true about her? And you could just see him pivot from that to a larger message about, can you trust this person? And again, I don't know the answer to that, but just reading how the president has expanded other lines of attack, you could envision how this would play out on a broader level. And listen, he never has just one insult or one criticism against a politician. Right. He finds a litany of them.
Very quick, Lemire, will we hear more of Pocahontas from Donald Trump, or is he going to move on to something new?
I think it's yes. The answer is yes and yes. There will be more of this. I agree with Jake. He's going to hit the authenticity argument. I also think that if Warren is the nominee, it becomes more binary choice, 1 versus 1. Warren's going to get asked about this Pocahontas thing again. He can't avoid that. But secondly, also the idea of this is going to appeal to, I think Trump and his people around him feel like this attack could appeal to his base, right, because they're so upset at the idea of someone trying to get that handout, someone trying to get the unfair advantage, same way they feel like about immigrants and so getting handed health care, things like that.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.